What would you do if the past you thought you'd left behind suddenly reappeared, right in the middle of your perfect new life? In tonight's story, we follow David Morrison, a self-made billionaire standing at the pinnacle of success. But when his pregnant ex-wife unexpectedly enters his world again at his own wedding banquet, everything changes. Love, redemption, and second chances collide in a journey that will test the hearts of everyone involved. Before we dive into this compelling tale, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy heartfelt, inspiring stories. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable journeys like this one. Now, let's begin. A billionaire saw his pregnant ex-wife cleaning tables at his wedding banquet. What he did next, the ballroom of the St. Regis knew. York glistened with opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast golden hues on silk-draped tables, while a live string quartet played softly in the background. Guests dressed in their finest mingled, their laughter and chatter weaving a melody of affluence. For David Morrison, this was a day of triumph, a celebration of his achievements and the beginning of his new chapter with Rebecca Carter, a Manhattan socialite whose elegance matched the grandeur of the occasion. David stood near the head table, shaking hands with an investor he had long sought to impress. His smile was effortless, his demeanor composed. The culmination of years of relentless ambition and sacrifice seemed to manifest in this moment. Yet as the music swelled and the room brimmed with congratulations, David felt a twinge of unease he couldn't quite place. It was then that he saw her. Across the ballroom, near a cluster of tables recently vacated by guests, stood Sarah Thompson. His ex-wife. Her once vibrant auburn hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and her black waitress uniform bore faint traces of wear. She was gathering plates with a precision that spoke of long hours spent in similar tasks. Despite her attempts to remain inconspicuous, David's eyes were drawn to her like a magnet. At first, disbelief clouded his mind. He blinked, unsure if the woman before him was truly Sarah or a phantom conjured by his subconscious. But then, he noticed the slight curve of her belly, partially hidden beneath her apron. She was pregnant. A wave of emotions surged through him, shock, confusion, and an unexpected pang of guilt. David's grip tightened around his champagne flute as memories surged forward, unbidden and vivid. He saw the cramped apartment in Boston where they had once dreamed of a brighter future together. Late nights spent brainstorming ideas for his fledgling startup. The meals they shared on a budget so tight it barely stretched to cover groceries. And inevitably the arguments that came as his work consumed him and left little room for their marriage. He had changed since then. His hard work had paid off, catapulting him into a world of luxury and power. Yet, standing there in that gilded ballroom surrounded by wealth and success, David felt a part of himself falter. Sarah's movements were efficient but cautious, as if she were trying to avoid drawing attention. She turned slightly and their eyes met. In that instant, time seemed to halt. David saw recognition flicker across her face, followed by something he couldn't quite decipher. Was it fear? Resignation? Her grip on the glass in her hand faltered, and it slipped, shattering on the polished floor. The sound pierced the ambient music, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. Sarah froze, her cheeks flushing as she crouched to pick up the shards. David instinctively stepped forward, his heart pounding, but stopped short as a server hurried to assist her. "Is something wrong, darling?" Rebecca's voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. She appeared at his side, her expression warm but curious. David forced a smile. "No, everything's fine," but everything wasn't fine. The image of Sarah, pregnant, vulnerable, yet holding herself with quiet dignity, was now etched into his mind. He turned his gaze back to the scene, only to see her retreating toward the kitchen doors, her posture stiff with what he imagined was humiliation. As Rebecca returned to mingle with guests, David's focus remained on those doors. Questions swirled in his mind. What had happened to Sarah after their divorce? Why was she working as a waitress, and why hadn't she told him about the baby? The grandeur of the wedding blurred around him, replaced by a growing sense of unease. David knew one thing for certain: this wasn't a coincidence. Fate, it seemed, had chosen this day, this moment, to bring Sarah back into his life. And it wasn't finished with him yet. As the sound of shattering glass still lingered in his ears, David excused himself from Rebecca's side. There were answers he needed, and they wouldn't wait. The sound of shattering glass still echoed in David's mind as he stood frozen near the head table. The memory of Sarah's wide eyes, filled with shock and something deeper, perhaps shame, stirred emotions he thought he had buried long ago. The ballroom's opulence blurred into the background as the past began to take hold, pulling him back to a different time. David's memories carried him to a cramped apartment in Boston. The walls were scuffed, the furniture mismatched, but the space hummed with life. He could see himself younger and hungrier, working late into the night. Papers cluttered the kitchen table, and an ancient coffee machine gurgled in the corner. Sarah would be there, her auburn hair tied back as she leaned over his shoulder, offering ideas for his startup pitch. Her laughter had been his solace on those long, uncertain nights. "Don't forget to breathe, David," she had said once, teasing him as he stressed over coding errors. "You're not a machine." Her faith in him had been unwavering. Even when money was tight and their future uncertain, she had always believed in his potential. Sarah worked 2 jobs back then, waitressing during the day and freelancing as a graphic designer at night to keep them afloat. She had never complained, even when the weight of their struggles bore down on her. But as David's startup began to take off, everything started to change. The memory shifted to their first taste of success. A modest investor had taken a chance on David's project, and suddenly their lives began to transform. The once cluttered kitchen table was replaced with a sleek office desk. Late-night brainstorming sessions turned into endless meetings, and David's presence at home became increasingly rare. "David, we need to talk," Sarah had said one evening, her voice quiet but firm. He had barely looked up from his laptop, engrossed in responding to an email from a potential client. "Can it wait? This deal could change everything," he replied without thinking. She sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "That's what you said last time." Their conversations became shorter, their connections strained. David couldn't see it at the time, but Sarah's patience was wearing thin. Her love for him had always been steadfast, but it was no match for the growing chasm between them. He was chasing success, blind to the cost it exacted on their relationship. The memory darkened further. To the night, everything fell apart. David had just closed his first major deal, a partnership with a Silicon Valley firm that would secure their financial future. He returned home, brimming with excitement, only to find Sarah packing a suitcase. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice rising in panic. She didn't look at him. "I can't do this anymore, David. You're not the man I fell in love with." His initial reaction had been anger. "I did all of this for us. How can you leave now when everything is finally coming together?" Sarah's response had been quiet but cutting. "You did this for you, David, and you lost sight of everything else along the way." The image of her walking out the door still haunted him. At the time, he had convinced himself that she would come back, that her departure was temporary. But she never did. Her absence had left a void in his life, one he had filled with work and ambition. Over the years, he had told himself that their breakup was inevitable, a casualty of his pursuit of success. Yet, standing in the lavish ballroom at the St. Regis, David realized he had never truly let her go. He thought of her now, back in his life after 5 long years. And she was pregnant. His mind raced with questions. Had she remarried? Was the baby his? Why hadn't she reached out? David glanced toward Rebecca, his bride-to-be, who was laughing with a group of friends near the center of the room. She looked radiant, every bit the poised Manhattan socialite. She had been a steady presence in his life, someone who understood the demands of his world. But for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Had he truly moved on, or had he merely buried the past? The sound of laughter and clinking glasses brought him back to the present. David tightened his grip on the edge of the table, his breathing uneven. He couldn't ignore the pull of the past, the unfinished story that Sarah represented. Whatever answers she held, he needed to know them. Rebecca turned to him, her expression softening. "David, are you all right? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about everything." She nodded, her attention soon drawn back to the guests. David took a steadying breath, his gaze once again drifting toward the kitchen doors where Sarah had disappeared. This wasn't the time or place for a confrontation, but he couldn't let the moment slip away. As the evening continued, David excused himself from Rebecca's side, mumbling something about needing a moment to himself. In reality, he was heading toward the kitchen, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. The sound of shattering glass from earlier still echoed in his mind, a reminder of the fragile thread that now connected him to Sarah once more. As David pushed open the kitchen doors, he found himself stepping into a different world, one far removed from the glittering ballroom. And there, among the clatter of dishes and hurried footsteps, stood Sarah, her back turned to him. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. "Sarah." She froze, her shoulders stiffening, and slowly turned to face him. The confrontation he had been avoiding for 5 years was about to begin. The kitchen was a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom David had just left. The hum of industrial appliances, the clatter of dishes, and the hurried footsteps of staff filled the air. A faint scent of detergent mingled with that of leftover food, grounding David in a reality far removed from the opulence he was accustomed to. Standing by the stainless steel sink was Sarah, her back to him. She was scrubbing a tray, her movements methodical yet hurried, as if she hoped the repetitive action would shield her from the world outside. Her figure, though slightly stooped with exhaustion, exuded a quiet resilience. David hesitated for a moment, his pulse quickening. "Sarah!" His voice broke the rhythm of her work. She froze, her shoulders stiffening as if bracing for impact. Slowly, she turned to face him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and apprehension. A stray strand of auburn hair clung to her damp forehead, a stark reminder of the long hours she had likely endured before this moment. "David," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing back here?" His heart ached at the sight of her, so different from the vibrant woman he once knew. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied softly, gesturing around the kitchen. "What's going on, Sarah? Why are you here?" She let out a shaky breath, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "I work here," she said simply, her tone laced with both defiance and resignation. "And before you ask, no, I don't need your help." David felt a pang of guilt. "Sarah, David!" A sharp voice interrupted him. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of confusion and dismay. She took in the scene, David standing inches away from a pregnant woman in a waitress uniform, and her eyes narrowed slightly. "What's going on here?" Rebecca asked, her tone icy. David turned to her, his words faltering. "Rebecca, this is Sarah, my ex-wife." For a moment, the room was suffocatingly silent. Rebecca's carefully composed demeanor cracked just enough to reveal her surprise. "I see," she said finally, her voice tight. "And why exactly are you back here talking to her?" "I needed answers," David said, his voice steady, despite the tension. "I didn't expect to see her tonight, let alone like this." Rebecca's gaze shifted to Sarah, who stood quietly, her posture defensive but dignified. "Well," Rebecca said, her tone softening just slightly, "perhaps we should let her get back to her work. This isn't the time or place for whatever this is." David opened his mouth to respond, but was cut off by a sudden crash from the ballroom. A tray of glasses had fallen, and the sound of shattering crystal drew murmurs from the guests. Several staff members scurried past, carrying brooms and towels. The noise seemed to galvanize Sarah. "I need to get back out there," she said quickly, brushing past David. "I don't have time for this." "Wait." David's voice was firm, but it carried a note of desperation. "Let me help you." Both women turned to him, their expressions incredulous. "Help me?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing. "David, this isn't your world." "It used to be," he said quietly. "Before the suits and the boardrooms, I know what hard work feels like. Let me do something for you." Before Sarah could protest, David shrugged off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over a nearby chair. Rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, he grabbed a nearby towel and moved toward the door. The ballroom fell into stunned silence as David stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He reached for the nearest, overturned tray, ignoring the whispers that followed him like a wave. The guests exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to disdain. This was not the behavior they expected from a tech billionaire. Rebecca stood at the edge of the ballroom, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes followed David as he bent down to pick up shards of broken glass, his movements calm and deliberate. The socialite in her bristled at the impropriety of the scene, but another part of her, a quieter, more empathetic part, was beginning to understand. Sarah emerged moments later, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She looked at David, who was still crouched on the floor, and shook her head. "David, stop! You don't have to do this." He glanced up at her, his eyes steady. "Yes, I do." For the next few minutes, David worked alongside Sarah, clearing tables and helping the staff reset for the next course. The whispers grew louder, but David paid them no mind. Rebecca remained rooted in place, her expression unreadable. When the tables were finally restored to order, Sarah turned to David, her arms crossed. "What are you trying to prove?" she asked, her voice low. "That I haven't forgotten who I used to be," he replied simply, "and that I care about what happens to you." Before Sarah could respond, a round of applause erupted from the far end of the ballroom. It was hesitant at first, but it grew in strength as several guests began to clap. Some smiled with approval, while others simply looked intrigued by the drama unfolding before them. Rebecca took a step forward, her face still carefully neutral. "David," she said, her tone measured, "we need to talk." David met her gaze, knowing this was far from over, but as he stood there, surrounded by the remnants of shattered glass and the weight of unspoken words, he realized that his life had reached a turning point. There was no going back now. As Rebecca turned and walked away, her shoulders tense, David realized he would have to face more than just Sarah's past. He would have to confront his own and the price of the choices he was about to make. Gasps rippled through the crowd as David straightened from his crouched position, holding the last shard of broken glass in his hand. He placed it carefully on the tray, his movements deliberate, almost defiant. Around him, the room buzzed with murmurs, a cacophony of disbelief from the high society guests unaccustomed to such a breach of decorum. Rebecca stood at the edge of the ballroom, her jaw set, her expression unreadable. Next to her, her mother, Eleanor Carter, a woman whose presence alone could silence a room, took a sharp step forward. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and tailored gown exuded an air of authority that commanded attention. "David," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the whispers like a blade, This spectacle has gone on long enough. Return to the head table immediately. David met her gaze, unflinching. No, he said simply, his voice calm but resolute. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin line. She turned to the guests, offering a polite but forced smile. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse this distraction. I assure you, everything is under control. David stepped forward, his posture straight, his voice carrying across the room. I disagree, Eleanor. Nothing about this situation is under control. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the sea of curious faces. But perhaps it's time. It was. The ballroom fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the gathering like a heavy curtain. Sarah, still standing near the edge of the scene, shifted uncomfortably. Her cheeks were flushed, and she avoided looking at the guests, focusing instead on the polished marble floor beneath her feet. David continued, his voice steady, but tinged with emotion. I see many familiar faces here tonight. People I've done business with, friends I've shared meals with, mentors who've guided me along the way. And I know this isn't what any of you expected to see at my wedding. There was a faint ripple of awkward laughter, quickly silenced by David's serious tone. But what you don't see is the full story. The woman standing here tonight, Sarah Thompson, isn't just a waitress. She's someone who shaped the man I am today. Rebecca's eyes flickered toward her mother, whose expression darkened with disapproval. Eleanor leaned in and whispered harshly, "This is unacceptable." "Control him, Rebecca," but Rebecca didn't move. Instead, she watched David, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something softer, something unspoken. David turned to Sarah, his voice softening. Sarah believed in me when no one else did. She worked 2 jobs to support us when my company was nothing more than an idea, scribbled on a napkin. She sacrificed more than I'll ever be able to repay, and His voice faltered slightly. I forgot that. I forgot her. Sarah finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. The raw vulnerability in her expression was impossible to miss. And for a moment, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. One of the guests, an older man in a sharp tuxedo, cleared his throat. This is all very touching, but perhaps this reunion could have waited until after the wedding? David turned to the man, his expression firm. I understand how this looks. And yes, it would have been easier to ignore her presence tonight, to pretend she wasn't here, but that's not who I want to be anymore. The whispers resumed, louder this time, as the guests exchanged incredulous glances. Eleanor stepped forward again, her patience clearly wearing thin. David, enough. You're embarrassing yourself, and Rebecca. David glanced at Rebecca, who still hadn't spoken. Rebecca, he said, his voice steady, I won't blame you if this changes how you feel about me, but I can't stay silent. Not anymore. Rebecca finally moved, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she walked toward the scene. All eyes were on her, the anticipation in the room almost palpable. She stopped a few feet from David, her gaze shifting briefly to Sarah before settling back on him. For a moment, no one spoke. No one. Then Rebecca took a deep breath and said, You're right, David. This isn't what anyone expected. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge to it that hinted at the storm beneath. But what I didn't expect, she continued, it was to see this side of you, the side that remembers where you came from, the side that cares about doing what's right, even when it's inconvenient. Eleanor gasped audibly, her composure slipping. Rebecca, surely you don't mean... Rebecca held up a hand, silencing her mother. I mean that I want to hear the rest of this story, and I think everyone here could learn something from it. The murmurs rose again, this time with a different tone, one of curiosity and perhaps even respect. Eleanor looked as though she might protest further, but a firm glance from Rebecca stopped her. David looked at Rebecca, his eyes searching hers for any sign of reproach. Instead, he saw understanding. Though it was tinged with pain, he nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected strength. Turning back to the room, David said, "If you're willing to listen, then I'll tell you everything. Because this isn't just about Sarah or me. It's about who we choose to be when faced with our past and how we move forward." As the guests settled into an uneasy silence, Rebecca turned to Sarah, her expression unreadable. "Would you like to tell your side of the story?" she asked, her voice calm but resolute. Sarah hesitated, her eyes flicking between David and Rebecca. For the first time that evening, she realized this wasn't just David's moment. It was hers as well. The room was unnervingly quiet, save for the soft rustle of dresses and the occasional clink of glasses, as the wedding guests, mesmerized by the unfolding drama, strained to hear what would happen next. Rebecca stood only a few feet from Sarah. Now, her posture poised, yet not unkind. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, drawing every eye in the grand ballroom. David stood between the two women, his gaze shifting anxiously from Rebecca's carefully neutral expression to Sarah's. Guarded one, his mind raced, searching for the right words to explain, to justify, or perhaps to apologize, but none seemed sufficient. Finally, Rebecca broke the silence, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "Sarah, I don't know you, but I can tell you're important to him. I see it in the way he looks at you." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the words, and for a moment her tough exterior seemed to crack. She began, but her voice faltered. Rebecca continued, stepping closer. "I also see something else. Something I recognize. Love. It's not an easy thing to admit when you've lost it, especially when it was once yours to hold." David shifted uncomfortably. "Rebecca, you don't have to." She silenced him, with a glance, her expression unreadable. "No, David, I think I do." Rebecca turned her attention fully to Sarah, her blue eyes searching for something in Sarah's face. "I've spent months planning this wedding," she said softly. "Every detail, every guest list, every menu choice. But not once did I ask myself what would happen if I saw the truth staring me in the face." "What truth?" Sarah asked cautiously, her arms still crossed protectively in front of her. Rebecca's lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "That he never truly left you behind." David's breath caught, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Rebecca held up a hand. "No, let me finish," she said, her voice steady. "David is a good man. I know that. He's kind, ambitious, and he's tried to build something meaningful with me. But tonight, standing here, I can see that part of his heart still belongs to you." The words struck like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. Sarah's fingers gripped the edge of her apron, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Rebecca, I didn't come here to ruin anything," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I didn't even know he was getting married. I was just doing my job." "I know," Rebecca said gently. "I can see that, and I don't think you're here to ruin anything. But maybe this wedding wasn't meant to happen." David stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. "Rebecca, I care about you deeply. You've been a partner to me in ways I never thought possible. But she's right. I've been running from my past, pretending it didn't matter, and in doing so, I've been lying to myself and to you." The raw honesty in his voice caused Rebecca to blink rapidly, fighting back tears. "Then tell me the truth, David. What do you want?" David turned to Sarah, his gaze softening. "I want to know what happened after you left. I want to know why you didn't tell me about the baby, and I want to find a way to make things right." Sarah's voice broke as she responded, the words spilling out after years of being held back. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd care. You were so focused on your career, on the deals and the clients, that I felt invisible. I thought you'd see the baby as just another obstacle." David flinched, her words cutting deeper than he had expected. "You're wrong," he said hoarsely. "If I had known, if I had understood, I never would have let you go." Rebecca watched the exchange in silence, her own emotions warring within her. It was painful to stand there, to witness the bond that still tied them together, but it was also strangely liberating. For all her planning, for all the visions of a perfect life with David, she realized that love couldn't be forced or fabricated. She cleared her throat, drawing their attention. "You two have a lot to talk about, and I think it's best if I give you the space to do that." "Rebecca, wait," David said, stepping toward her. She held up a hand. "David, I'll be fine. I need to think about what I want too. But for now, I think it's time for me to step aside." The room erupted into whispers as Rebecca turned and walked toward the exit, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. Eleanor Carter intercepted her near the doorway, her expression equal parts fury and concern. "Rebecca, what on earth are you doing?" "I'm doing what's right," Rebecca replied, her voice calm but firm. "For all of us," Eleanor sputtered, clearly unprepared for such a response, but Rebecca didn't stop. She left the ballroom without another word, her figure disappearing into the hallway. David turned back to Sarah, his chest tight with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything, Sarah. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm here now, and I want to be a part of your life. Your life and the baby's." Sarah hesitated, the weight of his words settling heavily on her. She wanted to believe him, to trust that he meant what he said, but years of disappointment had left her. Wary. "We'll see," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "This isn't just about you, David. It's about what's best for the baby." As the ballroom slowly emptied, David stayed behind, his thoughts a swirl of guilt, hope, and uncertainty. Meanwhile, Sarah retreated to the kitchen, her mind racing with the possibilities ahead. Both knew that the conversation they had begun tonight was far from over. The kitchen was quieter now, the hum of the industrial dishwasher providing the only background noise. Sarah sat on a metal stool near the prep station, her apron folded neatly in her lap. David stood across from her, leaning against the stainless steel counter. The tension between them hung heavy in the air, a mix of unspoken words and years of unresolved emotions. Sarah looked at him, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "You wanted answers, David. So here I am. Ask." David hesitated, the weight of his questions pressing down on him. Finally, he exhaled and asked the one that had haunted him since the moment he saw her earlier that night. "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah, about the baby?" Her lips pressed into a thin line as she considered her response. "Because I didn't think it would change anything," she said finally. "Back then, you were so consumed by your work, by your vision for the company. I felt like I was invisible, like I didn't matter anymore." David flinched at her words, guilt pooling in his chest. "You mattered," he said softly. "You always mattered." Sarah shook her head, her voice rising slightly. "Did I? Because every time I tried to talk to you, you brushed me off. Every time I asked for 5 minutes of your time, it was like I was competing with the rest of the world for your attention." She paused, her hands trembling as she placed the apron on the counter. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I didn't know how to tell you, and honestly I wasn't sure if I should. I thought maybe it would be better if I just left. You didn't need another complication." David's throat tightened. "A complication? Sarah, you weren't a complication. Neither was the baby. I wish you'd given me the chance to prove that." Sarah's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "And what would you have done, David? Back then, when every moment of your life was planned down to the second, when you barely had time to eat or sleep, what would you have done with a pregnant wife?" Her words cut deep because he knew she was right. The David Morrison of 5 years ago wouldn't have been ready for fatherhood. He had been too obsessed with success, too blinded by ambition to see what was right in front of him. "I would have tried," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I would have found a way." Sarah's expression softened further, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he meant it. "I don't know if I believe that, David. But I do know that I had to make a choice, and I chose to protect myself and the baby." Silence settled between them for a moment, broken only by the clinking of dishes in the distance. David ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts racing. He wanted to say something that would erase the years of hurt, to convince her that he had changed. But the truth was, he wasn't sure words would ever be enough. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. "I can't undo the past. I can't fix what I broke, but I can be here now for you, for the baby." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. "It's not just about showing up, David. It's about being consistent. It's about proving that you're willing to stay even when things get hard." Before David could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Rebecca stepped inside. Her presence was like a jolt, grounding them both in the reality of their situation. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe as she looked between them. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Rebecca said, her tone calm but laced with tension. "But I needed to know where we stand." David turned to her, his face conflicted. "Rebecca, She held up a hand, silencing him. "No, let me speak." She took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to Sarah. "I don't hate you, Sarah, and I don't blame you for what's happened tonight. But I need to know, what do you want from him?" Sarah blinked, startled by the question. I don't want anything from him," she said, her voice steady. "I never asked for his help, and I didn't come here to disrupt your life. All I want is to figure out how to do what's best for this baby." Rebecca nodded slowly, her expression softening. "And you, David? What do you want?" David met her gaze, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. "I want to be a father," he said finally. "I want to be there for Sarah and the baby, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you, Rebecca." "I do." Rebecca's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she nodded. "Thank you for being honest, David, and thank you for showing me who you really are. I think we both know what needs to happen." David's chest tightened. "Rebecca," she smiled sadly, shaking her head. "It's okay, David. This isn't the life I wanted, and it's not the life you need. Go be with your family. Do the right thing." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving David and Sarah alone once more. David exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping. He looked at Sarah, who was watching him with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "This doesn't mean everything's fixed," she said quietly. "We still have a lot to figure out." "I know," he replied, his voice steady. "But it's a start." As the evening wore on, David knew his decision would ripple far beyond that kitchen. Both families would demand answers, and the path forward wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity, a purpose that had been missing for far too long. The tension in the ballroom was palpable as David returned from the kitchen, his jacket draped over one arm, his tie loosened. The hum of murmurs rippled through the crowd like static electricity. Eleanor Carter, Rebecca's mother, stood near the head table, her face a mask of icy displeasure. Beside her, Rebecca held herself with grace, though her reddened eyes betrayed the tears she had fought back moments earlier. David stepped onto the small platform where the microphone stood, taking a deep breath as he faced the sea of curious, judgmental faces. He hadn't planned to address the guests, hadn't even imagined it, but postponing the inevitable no longer seemed like an option. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but weighted with emotion, "I know This evening has taken an unexpected turn, and I owe you an explanation." A ripple of whispers broke out, quickly silenced by Eleanor's sharp glare. David continued, his eyes scanning the room. "Rebecca and I have decided to postpone the wedding. It's a decision we've come to together, and one we believe is best for everyone involved." Rebecca nodded slightly at his words, her calm demeanor masking the emotional storm beneath. "David and I both value honesty," she added, stepping forward to stand beside him. "And tonight has shown us that sometimes the truth needs to be faced, even when it's uncomfortable." The guests exchanged stunned glances, some leaning closer to whisper, while others simply stared, unsure of how to react. Eleanor's expression darkened, her lips thinning into a displeased line as she stepped forward. "This is absurd," Eleanor hissed under her breath, loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. "You're humiliating our family in front of New York's elite." Rebecca turned to her mother, her voice calm but firm. "Mother, this isn't about you or our family's reputation. This is about doing what's right." Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but something in Rebecca's gaze silenced her. It was a look she hadn't seen before, a mixture of strength and determination that left no room for rebuttal. Meanwhile, Sarah remained in the kitchen, pacing the floor as she tried to process everything that had happened. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses from the ballroom felt like a distant world, one she no longer belonged to. Her fingers rested on the small curve of her belly as her thoughts swirled. She was startled when the kitchen door swung open, revealing Rebecca. The other woman's expression was unreadable as she stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. Sarah straightened, unsure of what to expect. "Rebecca," Sarah began, her voice cautious, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to disrupt your life." Rebecca held up a hand, stopping her. "I know," she said simply. "I believe you." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "You do?" Rebecca nodded, leaning lightly against the counter. "I've spent the past hour thinking about everything, about David, about you, and about what this all means, and I realized something." She paused, her gaze steady. "You're not my enemy, Sarah. You never were." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah's defenses softened slightly, though she still hesitated. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. "But I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I," Rebecca admitted. "But I do know this. David needs to take responsibility for his actions, and you deserve to be heard. I'm not here to stand in your way. I'm here to make sure we all find a way forward." Sarah stared at her, a flicker of something akin to gratitude crossing her face. "Thank you," she said after a moment. "That means more than you know." Back in the ballroom, David was navigating a very different kind of confrontation. Both families had gathered around him, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval and confusion. Postponing the wedding. Rebecca's father, Charles Carter, asked incredulously, "Do you realize what this will do to our reputation?" David met his gaze squarely. "This isn't about reputation, Charles. It's about doing what's right, for Rebecca, for Sarah, and for the child I just learned I'm going to have." The room fell silent at his words. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath was audible, and the expressions of the guests shifted from curiosity to outright shock. Charles's eyes narrowed. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," David replied, his tone unwavering. "I've spent too much of my life chasing success at the expense of the people who mattered most to me. I won't make that mistake again." Rebecca returned to the ballroom just as the murmurs began to rise again. She stepped onto the platform beside David, addressing the crowd with a poise that belied her emotional turmoil. "Tonight may not have gone as planned," she said, her voice clear and confident, "but life rarely does. What matters is how we respond to it." She glanced at David, her expression softening. "David and I may be going in different directions, but I respect him for the man he's becoming. And I hope you all will too. The guests clapped hesitantly at first, but the applause grew stronger as her words sank in. Rebecca stepped down from the platform, her father and mother trailing behind her, still muttering their discontent. David watched her go, a mixture of admiration and regret filling his chest. Later that evening, as the ballroom emptied and the staff began cleaning up, David found Sarah sitting quietly in a corner, her hands resting protectively on her belly. He approached her slowly, unsure of how to begin. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her, his voice soft but resolute. "I want to be there for you, for both of you." Sarah looked up at him, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she nodded. "It's a start." As the last of the guests departed and the ballroom lights dimmed, David knew the hardest part was yet to come. Rebuilding trust with Sarah, navigating the fallout with Rebecca's family, and preparing for fatherhood. His journey was only just beginning. The crisp chill of early spring filled the air as David parked his car in front of Sarah's modest townhouse. It had been 6 months since the tumultuous evening at the St. Regis. 6 months of navigating uncharted waters. The rhythm of his life had changed dramatically since then, shifting from high-stakes business meetings to prenatal appointments and nursery planning. David knocked gently on the door, a small bag of groceries in hand. Moments later, Sarah opened it, her round belly now unmistakable beneath a flowing maternity blouse. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and lingering caution, the unspoken complexities of their relationship still present, but softened. "By time, hey," she greeted, stepping aside to let him in. "You didn't have to bring more food, I have plenty." David shrugged, placing the bag on the counter. "Consider it my way of staying useful," he replied, his tone light but sincere. The small kitchen was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of David's Manhattan penthouse. He glanced at the fridge, its surface covered in handwritten reminders, ultrasound photos, and a colorful calendar marking Sarah's due date. It was a world far removed from his own, yet he found himself drawn to it. "Did you eat lunch yet?" he asked, unpacking the groceries. Sarah smirked, leaning against the counter. "Yes, Dad, I ate lunch, and yes, it included vegetables." David chuckled, but the sound was tinged with nervous energy. He wasn't used to this. Domesticity, vulnerability, fatherhood, but he was trying. For Sarah, for the baby, for the man he wanted to become. Their routine had become surprisingly natural. Twice a week, David would stop by to help with errands, or keep Sarah company during her doctor's visits. While the early weeks had been fraught with tension and hesitant small talk, they had gradually found a rhythm, their conversations flowing more easily as trust began to rebuild. As they sat down at the small kitchen table, Sarah handed him a stack of baby name books. "I thought you might want to help pick a name," she said, her voice soft but steady. David blinked in surprise. "You want my input?" "Of course," Sarah replied. "This is your child too." The words struck him deeply, filling him with a mix of pride and guilt. He flipped through the pages, noting names with quiet enthusiasm. "What about Grace?" he suggested. "It's simple, but strong." Sarah smiled faintly, her hand resting on her belly. "Grace? I like that. It feels right." Meanwhile, Rebecca had found her own version of Grace. After the wedding was called off, she had taken some time away, traveling to Europe to reassess her life. The experience had been transformative, allowing her to rediscover passions she had long set aside. Now back in New York, Rebecca had thrown herself into philanthropic work, channeling her energy into causes that resonated with her. David and Rebecca had maintained a respectful friendship, their interactions cordial but tinged with the understanding that they were on separate paths. She had even sent Sarah a handwritten note, wishing her well and offering to help if needed. It was a gesture that Sarah appreciated, though she wasn't entirely sure how to respond. As the weeks passed, Preparations for the baby's arrival brought both families into the fold in unexpected ways. Eleanor Carter, initially resistant to the entire situation, began to thaw after Rebecca's gentle prodding. She had even surprised Sarah by gifting her a set of heirloom baby blankets, a gesture that was as much an olive branch as it was an expression of grandmotherly pride. David's parents, who had remained supportive but distant during his marriage to Sarah, eagerly stepped into their roles as future grandparents. They visited regularly, bringing thoughtful gifts and sharing stories about David's own childhood that Sarah had never heard before. The once fractured connections were slowly knitting together, creating a patchwork family that, while unconventional, felt increasingly whole. One crisp evening, as Sarah and David were organizing the nursery, Sarah paused, her hand resting on the edge of the crib. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked quietly. David looked up from the stack of diapers he was arranging. "Every day," he admitted. "But I also think about how lucky I am to have this second chance. I don't want to waste it." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes soft but thoughtful. "Neither do I." Just as the moment settled into a comfortable silence, Sarah suddenly winced, her hand flying to her belly. "Oh," she gasped, her face tightening. David was at her side in an instant. "What is it? Are you okay?" Sarah exhaled sharply, gripping his arm for support. I think it's time." David's heart raced. "Now? Are you sure?" She nodded, her breaths coming in quick, shallow bursts. "Yes, the baby's coming." Panic and determination warred within him as he grabbed the hospital bag they had prepared weeks ago. "Okay," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's get you to the hospital." As they made their way out the door, the weight of the moment pressed down on David. Everything they had worked toward, every conversation, every sacrifice, it had all led to this. And as he helped Sarah into the car, he knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and anxious anticipation. As David gripped the steering wheel, glancing at Sarah in the rearview mirror, he realized that the next few hours would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came next, together. The hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet urgency of nurses bustling through the halls set the tone as David wheeled Sarah into the emergency room. Her breaths came in sharp, labored bursts, and her grip on his hand was iron tight. The weight of the moment hit David like a tidal wave. This was happening, too soon perhaps, but it was happening. A nurse in scrubs met them, her practiced calm immediately soothing. "Premature labor?" she asked, glancing at Sarah. "Yes," Sarah gasped, wincing through another contraction. 35 weeks, the nurse nodded and motioned toward a wheelchair. "We'll take good care of you. Let's get you to a room." David stayed by Sarah's side, his heart pounding as he pushed the wheelchair through the labyrinth of hospital corridors. The sterile smell of antiseptic mingled with the faint hum of machines, grounding him in the reality of the situation. As they entered the delivery suite, Sarah's face contorted with pain. A doctor introduced herself and began explaining the risks of a premature birth, her tone measured but clear. David listened intently, feeling the weight of every word. 35 weeks was early, but the doctor reassured them that the baby had a strong chance of being healthy with the right care. "Sarah, you're doing great," David murmured, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "I'm scared, David," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "But you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." Back in the waiting room, Rebecca arrived after a hurried phone call from David. Her usual polished composure was replaced by genuine concern as she approached the desk to ask for updates. When a nurse explained the situation, Rebecca immediately began making calls, ensuring that the best neonatal specialists were on standby. Eleanor Carter arrived shortly after, her demeanor unusually subdued. She glanced at Rebecca, who was busy, coordinating arrangements, and then at David's parents, who sat together in anxious silence. For once, Eleanor set aside her social airs and sat down beside them, offering quiet words of support. The families, once divided by pride and circumstance, found themselves united by concern for Sarah and the baby. Small conversations began to flow, tentative but genuine, bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable only months earlier. Inside the delivery room, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Sarah's contractions were coming closer together, and the doctor's voice was firm, but encouraging. "You're doing great, Sarah, just a little more." David held her hand, his grip steady, despite the storm of emotions inside him. "You're incredible," he whispered. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she bore down through another contraction. The sound of the heart monitor filled the room, each beep a reminder of the life they were about to welcome. Hours passed, each moment stretching into eternity. Rebecca peeked into the room once, her presence a quiet reassurance. Though she didn't say much, her calm efficiency in the waiting area had already made a difference. She gave David a brief nod, as if to say, "You've got this," before retreating to let him focus on Sarah. Finally, a sharp cry pierced the air. "It's a girl!" the doctor announced, her voice filled with warmth. She lifted the tiny infant, wrapped in a blanket, and handed her to Sarah, who was now sobbing with relief and joy. David leaned over, his own tears blurring his vision as he gazed at the baby. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice cracking. Sarah looked up at him, a weary but radiant smile on her face. "Grace," she said softly. "Her name is Grace." David nodded, his heart swelling with an emotion he couldn't put into words. "Welcome to the world, Grace," he murmured, brushing his finger against her tiny hand. Outside the room, Rebecca stood by the window, watching as the nurses cleaned and swaddled the newborn. Eleanor joined her, her voice quiet. "You did a good thing tonight, Rebecca." Rebecca's expression softened. "It wasn't about me," she replied. "It was about what was right." Eleanor nodded, the faintest hint of pride touching her features. "Sometimes doing what's right is the hardest thing of all." The two families were soon invited into the room, where they gathered around the new parents and baby Grace. There was an undeniable sense of unity, fragile but real. Grandparents cooed over the baby, and even Eleanor allowed herself a moment to smile down at her new granddaughter. David looked around the room, taking in the sight of these once fractured relationships now coming together. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. As David cradled Grace in his arms, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was the life he wanted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now he was surrounded by love, and that was all that mattered. The church was filled with a soft glow from the afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows. The gentle hum of organ music created a serene atmosphere as friends and family gathered for Grace's christening. The air carried a sense of renewal, the kind that comes only from weathering life's storms and emerging stronger. David adjusted his tie nervously, standing at the front of the pews. Though he had spoken at countless board meetings and addressed thousands at tech conferences, this moment felt more important than any of them. Sarah stood beside him, holding Grace, whose white christening gown seemed to glow as brightly as her tiny smile. Rebecca entered quietly, her elegance understated yet commanding attention. She carried a small wrapped gift, a silver locket engraved, with Grace's initials, a symbol of her role as the child's godmother. She exchanged a warm smile with Sarah as she joined them at the front, an unspoken understanding passing between the two women. The ceremony was simple but profound. As the pastor poured holy water over Grace's forehead, David felt a lump form in his throat. This was more than a religious rite. It was a symbol of how far they had all come. The fractured relationships, the mistakes, the sacrifices. It had all led to this moment of unity. When the pastor lifted Grace and presented her to the congregation, a ripple of applause broke out. David glanced at Sarah, who met his gaze with a mixture of gratitude and joy. They had rebuilt something fragile, yet enduring, a foundation for their daughter and for themselves. After the ceremony, the family gathered in the church's reception hall. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter as Eleanor Carter chatted amiably with David's mother about baby Grace, the tension between the families now a distant memory. David's father stood near the refreshment table, joking with Rebecca about her new role as godmother. Rebecca, for her part, had embraced her fresh start. Her philanthropic work had flourished over the past year, and she had found fulfillment in ways she hadn't expected. Watching her interact with the family, Sarah marveled at her poise and grace. Any lingering doubts about Rebecca's sincerity had long since faded. "Thank you for being here," Sarah said softly, approaching Rebecca. She cradled Grace in her arms, the baby now sleeping peacefully. Rebecca smiled, her eyes warm. "Of course, Grace is lucky to have you as her mother, and lucky to have you in her life," Sarah replied earnestly. "I never thought we'd end up here, but I'm glad we did." Rebecca nodded, her gaze shifting to David, who was entertaining a small group of children with an impromptu magic trick. "He's changed a lot, hasn't he?" she said, almost to herself. Sarah followed her gaze. "Yes, he has. But I think we all have." The evening brought a new gathering, a charity gala hosted by David and Rebecca's foundation, a joint venture that had become a symbol of their shared commitment to giving back. The event was held in the same grand ballroom, where a year earlier their lives had collided in unexpected ways. Now, the room was transformed, filled with people united by a common purpose. David stood near the entrance, greeting guests alongside Sarah and Rebecca. The three of them formed an unlikely but harmonious team, their shared history adding depth to their partnership. Grace, now 1 year old, was being doted on by her grandparents at a nearby table, her laughter punctuating the hum of conversation. The evening's highlight was a speech delivered by David, who took the stage with Sarah and Rebecca by his side. He spoke about the importance of community, of facing the past to build a better future, and of using privilege as a tool for compassion rather than division. "This past year has taught me that life rarely goes as planned," David said, his voice steady. "But it's in those unplanned moments where we often find our greatest blessings. Grace is proof of that." He glanced at Sarah, who smiled softly, and then at Rebecca, who nodded in quiet agreement. The audience erupted into applause, their faces reflecting admiration and respect. As the gala wound down, David found himself standing by the ballroom's large windows, gazing out at the city skyline. Sarah joined him, leaning lightly against his shoulder. "It's funny," she said, her voice thoughtful. "A year ago, this room felt like the end of everything, and now it feels like the start of something new." David nodded, wrapping an arm around her. "Because it is, and this time we're doing it right." Across the room, Rebecca watched them with a wistful smile. She felt no bitterness, only peace. Her own journey was just beginning, and she knew that her role in Grace's life, though different, was just as meaningful. The night ended with a group photo, a snapshot of an unconventional family brought together by love, resilience, and the willingness to grow. Grace, nestled in Sarah's arms, was the bright center of it all, her presence a reminder of how far they had come. As the guests departed and the ballroom emptied, David lingered by the windows, gazing out at the city skyline. The soft glow of the lights reflected his thoughts, a quiet contentment, a peace hard-earned through the trials of the past year. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in its imperfections, he had found something he hadn't even known. He was searching for a sense of purpose, a family and a future filled with possibility. To our wonderful audience, we'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Share your thoughts and your own reflections on this story in the comments below. We always enjoy hearing from you. If you've been moved by David, Sarah, and Rebecca's journey, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you never miss another inspiring story. And if you found value in this tale, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that even in life's most unexpected moments, beauty can be found. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we can't wait to see you in the next chapter of our storytelling. Take care and see you soon.